What would you do if the child you gave your whole life to look you in the eyes at 75 and told you to leave? I wish I was telling you a story I heard somewhere, but this is my story. At 75, life had slowed down in a way I once thought I would enjoy. Living in Kansas City, Missouri, my days were quiet, predictable, and filled with small routines that gave me a sense of peace. The house I lived in wasn't just a place to sleep. It was a reflection of my entire life. Every wall, every corner, every creak in the wooden floor carried a memory. I had built it with my own hands decades ago, back when my energy was strong and my dreams were even stronger. I still remember the long days of work, coming home covered in dust, but feeling proud because I was creating something lasting for my family. Mornings were my favorite time. I would wake up early, make myself a simple cup of coffee, and sit by the window watching the neighborhood slowly come to life. The same streets where my son Daniel once played as a child now felt quieter, almost unfamiliar. Back then, laughter filled the air. Now it was mostly silence, broken only by the distant sound of cars or the wind brushing through the trees. But I had made peace with that silence. I told myself this was what growing old looked like. Less noise, fewer people, but more time to think. Sometimes, I would find myself drifting back to old memories. I remembered taking Daniel out on weekends, trying to give him the kind of childhood I never had. We would visit places like the National WWI Museum and Memorial, where he would stare in wonder at the view from the top while I stood beside him, quietly proud. Other days, we would walk across the open lawn of the Nelson Atkins Museum of Art, where those giant shuttlecock sculptures always made him laugh. Those were simple moments, but to me, they meant everything. They were proof that all the sacrifices, all the long hours I worked, were worth it. As the years passed, life naturally changed. Daniel grew up, built his own life, and the house that once felt full slowly became quieter. I didn't complain. I understood that this was how life worked. Children grow, they move on, and parents learn to step back. Still, I believed something deeper remained. Respect, connection, a bond that time couldn't break. I believed that no matter how much life changed, family would always stand together. I spent my days maintaining the house, fixing small things here and there, keeping everything just the way it had always been. It gave me purpose. It reminded me that I still had control over something, that I was still capable. In the evenings, I would sit alone, sometimes flipping through old photo albums, sometimes just staring into space, thinking about the life I had lived. There was no bitterness in those moments, only a quiet acceptance and a sense of fulfillment that I had done my best as a father, as a provider, as a man who tried to build something meaningful from nothing. When I think about my life, everything seems to revolve around one person, my son Daniel. From the day he was born, something inside me changed. Suddenly, my dreams didn't matter as much as his future. I still remember holding him for the first time, promising myself that no matter how hard life got, I would give in everything I never had. Back then, I wasn't a wealthy man, and life in Kansas City wasn't always easy. But I had determination, and more than anything, I had love for my child. I worked long hours, often taking extra shifts just to make sure there was always food on the table and a roof over our heads. There were nights I came home exhausted, my hands rough and my body aching. But the moment I saw Daniel run toward me, with a smile, all that tiredness seemed to disappear. He had this way of making everything feel worth it. Even the smallest things, helping him with his homework, teaching him how to ride a bike, or just sitting together during dinner, felt like moments I would carry forever. As he grew older, I made sure he never felt the struggles I had gone through. I wanted him to have opportunities, to dream bigger than I ever could. I saved every dollar I could, cutting back on my own needs just so he could have better clothes, better education, a better life. There were times I went without things I needed, but I never once thought of it as a sacrifice. To me, it was simply what a father does. Weekends were special. No matter how busy or tired I was, I always made time for him. We would go out, explore the city, and create memories that I believed would stay with him forever. I can still picture those days clearly. The laughter, the excitement in his eyes, the way he would hold onto my hand like I was the strongest man in the world. In those moments, I truly believed I was doing everything right. I tried to teach him values too: respect, kindness, responsibility. I wanted him to grow into a good man, someone who would understand the importance of family. Whenever he made mistakes, I didn't raise my voice much. Instead, I would sit with him, talk to him, explain things patiently. I believed that understanding was stronger than anger. I believed that if I showed him enough love and guidance, he would carry those lessons with him into adulthood. As the years passed, I watched him grow into a young man. He became more independent, more focused on his own life, which I knew was natural. Still, I held on to the belief that deep down he remembered everything: the struggles, the care, the endless support. I thought those memories would shape how he saw me, how he treated me, how he valued the bond we shared. To me, Daniel wasn't just my son. He was the reason I kept going on my hardest days, the reason I pushed through every challenge life threw at me. Everything I built, everything I worked for, was for him. I never imagined a future where that connection would fade, where the love I gave so freely would somehow lose its meaning, where the child I raised with so much care would one day look at me not as a father, but as someone who no longer belonged. Some of the happiest memories of my life weren't built on money or success, but on simple days spent with my son, walking side by side through the heart of Kansas City. Back then, life felt lighter. There was a warmth in the air, a sense that everything was exactly as it should be. Daniel was still young, full of curiosity, always asking questions, always wanting to explore something new. And I made sure I was always there, guiding him, watching him, quietly shaping the man I hoped he would become. One place that always stood out was the National WWI Museum and Memorial. I remember the first time I took him there. He must have been no older than 8. We walked slowly through the exhibits, and even though he didn't fully understand the history, I could see something in his eyes: respect, curiosity, a quiet fascination with the stories of the past. When we reached the top and looked out over the skyline, he stood beside me, completely still, as if the world had suddenly grown bigger in his mind. I placed my hand on his shoulder, not saying much, just sharing that moment. To me, it wasn't just about the view. It was about showing him perspective, helping him understand that life was bigger than just us. Other days we would visit the Nelson Atkins Museum of Art. That place always had a different kind of energy. The open lawn, the wide space, and those giant shuttlecock sculptures. scattered across the grass. It was like a playground mixed with something deeper. Daniel loved running around there, laughing as he tried to reach the towering structures, his voice echoing in the open air. I would sit nearby, watching him, feeling a quiet pride that's hard to describe. Those were the moments when I felt like I had done something right, when life felt full, complete in a way that didn't need anything more. We didn't always need big plans. Sometimes it was just about walking together, talking about small things, his school, his friends, his dreams. He would tell me what he wanted to be when he grew up, and I would listen carefully, encouraging him, even when his ideas changed from one week to the next. I never laughed at his dreams. I wanted him to believe that anything was possible, that he could build a life bigger and better than mine. There was a closeness between us back then that felt unbreakable. He trusted me completely, and I trusted that the bond we were building would last a lifetime. Every laugh, every conversation, every quiet moment together felt like a being added to something strong and permanent. I truly believed that no matter how much time passed, no matter how much life changed, those memories would remain alive in both of us, shaping who we were and keeping us connected in ways that nothing could ever undo. That Sunday morning began like any other, quiet and unremarkable, in my home in Kansas City. The sunlight slipped gently through the window, casting soft shadows across the room, and for a moment, everything felt calm. I had my usual cup of coffee in my hands. Sitting in the same chair I had sat in for years, listening to the faint sounds of the neighborhood waking up. It was the kind of morning that carried a sense of peace, the kind that makes you believe life is steady, predictable, and safe. I remember thinking about nothing in particular, just letting my mind drift the way it often did these days. At 75, your thoughts slow down, and you start to notice the small things more, the ticking of a clock, the warmth of sunlight, the quiet comfort of familiar surroundings. That house had been my world for decades. Every corner held a memory, every wall carried a piece of my life. There was a sense of belonging there that I never questioned. Then I heard footsteps. They were firm, deliberate, not the casual kind you ignore. I looked up and saw Daniel standing in the doorway. Something about him felt different immediately. It wasn't just his posture or the way he stood with his arms crossed. It was the energy he brought into the room. Cold, distant, unfamiliar. He didn't greet me. No good morning, no smile, no sign of the warmth I once knew. For a moment, I thought maybe something was wrong, that he was upset about something outside the house. I even considered asking if everything was okay. But before I could say anything, he spoke. "Dad, it's time. You can't stay here anymore." The words didn't make sense at first. They hung in the air, heavy and confusing, as if my mind refused to accept them. I blinked, trying to process what I had just heard. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe he meant something else. Maybe there was some explanation that would make it all clear. But when I looked at his face, there was no hesitation, no softness, no sign that this was a joke or a misunderstanding. It was real. In that moment, something shifted inside me. The calm of the morning disappeared, replaced by a quiet tension that spread through the room. My hands tightened slightly around the cup I was holding, though I didn't even realize it at the time. I searched his face, hoping to find even a small hint of the boy I once knew, the child who used to look at me with trust, with love. But he wasn't there. Standing in front of me was someone else entirely. Someone who looked at me not as a father, but as a problem. The silence between us grew heavier with each passing second. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down, making it harder to breathe, harder to think clearly. Everything that once felt certain suddenly felt fragile, like it could fall apart at any second. I realized then that this wasn't just a conversation. It wasn't a misunderstanding that could be fixed with a few words. Something deeper had changed, something I hadn't seen coming, something that had been building quietly while I believed everything was still the same. I looked at him, still trying to understand how the moment had turned so quickly. How a quiet Sunday morning in Kansas City had suddenly become something I couldn't recognize. My voice felt heavier than usual when I finally spoke, almost as if the words had to fight their way out. "Where will I go?" I asked softly. It wasn't just a question. It was confusion, disbelief, and a small hope that maybe, just maybe, he would realize what he was saying and take it back. For a brief second, I waited for him to hesitate, to look away, to show even a trace of emotion. But he didn't. "That's not my problem." The way he said it, calm, direct, without any pause, that was what hurt the most. It wasn't anger. It wasn't frustration. It was indifference. As if the man standing in front of him wasn't the one who had spent a lifetime raising him, but just someone who no longer mattered. Those words didn't just land, they echoed. Over and over again in my mind, louder each time. I felt something inside me crack, something I didn't even realize I was still holding on to. It wasn't just the pain of being told to leave. It was the realization that to him, I had already been left behind. I searched his face again, hoping to find something familiar, a flicker of guilt, a hint of regret, anything that would remind me of the son I once knew. But there was nothing. His expression remained unchanged, his eyes steady, almost cold. For a moment, I thought about speaking up, about reminding him of everything, of the years, the sacrifices, the love I had given without expecting anything in return. I thought about telling him how much those words hurt, how they cut deeper than anything life had thrown at me before. But the words never came, because deep down, I understood something in that moment. This wasn't about logic or explanation. It wasn't about right or wrong. Whatever had changed inside him had already changed long before this conversation. The room felt smaller, heavier, like the air itself had thickened. I could hear the faint ticking of the clock on the wall, each second stretching longer than the last. Time didn't feel normal anymore. Everything felt slow, unreal, as if I was watching my own life from a distance. I lowered my eyes for a moment, not out of weakness, but because I needed to steady myself. At 75, you don't expect to feel this kind of pain, not from a stranger, and certainly not from your own child. Life teaches you to endure many things, but it doesn't prepare you for moments like this. When I looked back up, Daniel hadn't moved. He was still standing there, waiting, as if the conversation was already over in his mind. And maybe it was. Because in that moment, something important became clear to me, not through words, but through silence. The bond I had believed in for so many years, the connection I thought could never be broken, had already slipped away without me. Even realizing it, I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. Something inside me had already gone quiet after those words, and I realized there was nothing left to say that would change what was happening. In that house in Kansas City, where I had spent more than 40 years building a life, I suddenly felt like a stranger. Daniel turned away as if the matter was already settled. There was no discussion, no explanation, just a silent understanding that I was no longer welcome. I stood there for a few seconds, letting the reality sink in, trying to gather whatever strength I had left. Then, slowly, I walked toward my room. Each step felt heavier than the last. That room had always been my space, simple but filled with memories. The old dresser I had fixed myself years ago. The photographs carefully placed on the shelf, the small things that most people wouldn't notice. But to me, they meant everything. I opened the closet and stared at my clothes, unsure of what to take, unsure of how to pack an entire life in a single suitcase. My hands moved slowly, almost mechanically, folding shirts, picking up a few essentials. I didn't rush. Not because I had time, but because I didn't know how to leave any faster. Every item I touched seemed to carry a memory. Holidays, birthdays, quiet evenings, moments I thought would always stay with me inside these walls. I paused when I picked up an old photograph of Daniel as a child. He couldn't have been more than 10, smiling widely, his arm wrapped around me. For a moment I just stood there, looking at it, trying to understand how that boy had become the man who just asked me to leave. I wanted to feel anger, but what I felt instead was something deeper, a quiet, aching sadness. I placed the photo gently into my bag. When I stepped out of the room, the house felt different, colder, empty in a way it had never felt before. I looked around one last time. The living room, where we used to sit together, the kitchen where I had cooked countless meals, the hallway that had once echoed with laughter. Everything was still there, but somehow it no longer felt like mine. My bags were already by the door. Daniel didn't say anything. He didn't look at me the way he used to. There was no goodbye, no hesitation, just silence. I stood near the door for a moment, hoping, without even realizing it, that he might say something, anything that would stop me from walking out. But nothing came, so I reached for my suitcase. The handle felt cold in my hand as I opened the door and stepped outside. The air hit me differently, sharper somehow, as if the world itself had changed. I turned back for just a second, looking at the house I had built, the place that had been my home for most of my life, and then I walked away. Each step felt unreal, like I was leaving behind not just a house, but a part of myself I could never get back. The street looked the same as it always had, but I no longer felt like I belonged there. People passed by, cars moved as usual. Life continued without pause. But for me, everything had shifted in a way I couldn't yet fully understand. That night felt longer than any night I had ever lived through. The streets of Kansas City were quieter than usual, or maybe it just felt that way because everything inside me had gone silent. I found myself sitting on a cold metal bench at a bus stop, my suitcase resting beside me, my hands folded tightly as if I was trying to hold myself together. The air had a chill to it, the kind that slowly creeps into your bones. I could feel it through my coat, through my skin, settling deep inside me. Cars passed by every now and then, their headlights briefly lighting up the empty street before disappearing into the distance. Each passing moment felt slow, stretched, like time itself had lost its rhythm. I had nowhere to go. That was the thought that kept repeating in my mind, not in panic, not in anger, but in a quiet, heavy realization. At 75, after a lifetime of building, working, sacrificing, I was sitting alone, with nothing but a suitcase and memories that suddenly felt distant. I leaned back slightly, staring ahead without really seeing anything. My mind drifted, not by choice, but because there was nothing else to hold on to. Memories came one after another. Daniel as a child, running toward me with a smile, calling out, "Dad," with a voice full of excitement. I could almost hear it. I could almost see it as clearly as if it were happening right in front of me. And then it faded, replaced by the image of him standing in front of me that morning, cold, distant, unrecognizable. I closed my eyes for a moment, taking a slow breath, trying to steady myself. I had faced hardships before. Life had never been easy. There were years when I struggled to make ends meet. Years when every dollar mattered, when every decision carried weight. But even in those moments, I had purpose. I had something to fight for. Tonight felt different. Tonight, it wasn't about money or work or survival. It was something deeper. A kind of emptiness I had never known before. It wasn't just about losing a place to live. It was about losing the sense of belonging I had carried my entire life. I looked down at my hands. They were older now, worn from years of labor, marked by time. These were the same hands that built my home, that held my son when he was just a child, that worked day and night to create a life for him, and now they rested quietly, with nothing left to hold on to. The bench felt harder with each passing minute, the cold pressing against my back, reminding me of where I was, a stranger in my own life. People came and went, some glancing in my direction, most not noticing me at all. To them, I was just another old man, sitting at a bus stop. They couldn't see the years behind me, the life I had lived, the story that had brought me here. I tightened my grip on the handle of my suitcase, as if it was the only thing grounding me in that moment. It held what little I had left, but more than that, it felt like a symbol of everything that had changed in a single day. The night grew quieter, heavier, wrapping around me like a weight I couldn't shake off. And as I sat there, surrounded by silence, one question kept returning, not loudly, but persistently, echoing somewhere deep inside me, asking me to face a truth I wasn't ready to accept. As I sat there that night, alone in the quiet streets of Kansas City, a thought slowly began to surface through all the pain and confusion. It wasn't something new. In fact, it was something I had decided years ago, long before this moment ever came. Back then, it felt like a small, cautious step. Now, it felt like the only thing holding me together. I remembered the time when I started noticing what was happening to people around me. Friends I had known for years, men who had worked just as hard as I had, suddenly losing everything they built. They trusted their children, signed over their homes, transferred their savings, believing that love and loyalty would always remain. But I saw what happened next. Slowly, things changed. Respect faded. Control slipped away, and in the end, some of them were left with nothing, not even a place to call their own. Those moments stayed with me. I didn't say much about it to anyone. I didn't make a big announcement or turn it into a family discussion. But quietly, I made a decision, a simple one, but a firm one. I would never give up control of what I had built, not while I was still alive. It wasn't about distrust. At least, that's what I told myself at the time. It was about being careful, about protecting the life I had spent decades creating. Every dollar I earned came from hard work. Every part of my home carried a piece of my effort, my time, my energy. I couldn't just hand that over, no matter how much I loved my son. So I didn't. I never transferred the property. I never signed over the accounts. Everything remained exactly as it was, under my name, under my control. It wasn't something that came up often. Life continued as usual, and there was never a moment where I felt the need to explain it. I believed, maybe even hoped, that it would never matter. But now, sitting there with my suitcase beside me, it mattered more than anything. For the first time since that morning, I felt something shift inside me. Not relief, not exactly, but a sense of stability. Something solid in the middle of all the uncertainty. I hadn't lost everything. Not really. What I built was still mine. Legally, completely, unquestionably mine. And Daniel didn't know that. That realization didn't bring me joy. It didn't feel like some kind of victory. Instead, it felt like clarity. A quiet understanding of the situation I was in. For hours, I had been sitting there, feeling like I had been pushed out of my own life. But now, I began to see it differently. I wasn't powerless. I had choices. The pain was still there, deep and undeniable. Nothing about that day could erase what had happened. Nothing could take back the words he said. But beneath that pain, something else was forming, something steady, something controlled. I straightened slightly on the bench, my grip on the suitcase loosening just a little. My breathing slowed, my thoughts becoming clearer. For the first time since I walked out of that house, I wasn't just reacting to what had been done to me. I was thinking about what I would do next. The next morning felt different from the night before. The cold bench, the silence, the weight of everything that had happened. It was still there in my body, but my mind was clearer. As the sun slowly rose over Kansas City, I realized something important. I couldn't stay stuck in what had already been done. I had to take control of what came next. I found a small cafe not far from the bus stop, the kind of place people pass by without thinking twice. It wasn't anything special, but it was warm, and right then, that was enough. I stepped inside, carrying my suitcase with me, feeling the quiet weight of the stares from a few people who noticed. I didn't pay attention. I had something else on my mind. I sat down near the window, ordered a simple cup of coffee, and for a moment just held it in my hands, letting the warmth settle into my fingers. It reminded me of my mornings at home, but I didn't let my thoughts drift too far. This wasn't the time to get lost in memories. This was the time to act. I reached into my pocket and took out my phone. My hands were steady, more steady than I expected after everything that had happened. I scrolled through my contacts slowly until I found the name I was looking for. Mr. Thompson. He had been my lawyer for years, someone I trusted, someone who understood my situation better than most. We hadn't spoken in a while, but I knew he would remember me. More importantly, I knew he would understand the decision I had made long ago. I stared at his name for a second, not because I was unsure, but because I knew that this call would change everything. Once I made it, there would be no going back to the way things were. Then I pressed the button. The phone rang a few times, each second stretching just a little longer than the last. Around me, the quiet sounds of the cafe continued. Cups clinking, Low conversations, the soft hum of life moving on as if nothing had changed. But for me, everything was about to shift. "Hello, Mr. Thompson speaking." His voice was calm, professional, exactly as I remembered it. I took a slow breath before answering. "It's me," I said. "I think it's time." There was a brief pause on the other end. Not confusion, but recognition. He understood. He always did. "All right," he replied, his tone becoming more focused. "Tell me what happened." And I did. I didn't rush through it, but I didn't dwell on emotions either. I explained everything clearly: the conversation, the way I was asked to leave, the fact that I had never transferred ownership of anything. I could feel my voice staying steady, even as I spoke about things that had shaken me just hours before. When I finished, there was another short silence. Then he said, "You did the right thing by calling." Those words carried a different kind of weight. Not emotional, not comforting, but firm, grounded, real. We talked through the next steps carefully, precisely. Legal notices, ownership rights, what could be done, and how quickly it could happen. It wasn't complicated, because everything was already in place. The decisions I made years ago had made this moment simple, clear. By the time the call ended, something inside me had fully shifted. The uncertainty that had followed me through the night was gone. In its place was a sense of direction, a quiet control over the situation that I hadn't felt since before that Sunday morning. I set my phone down on the table and took a sip of my coffee. It had gone slightly cold, but I didn't mind. For the first time since I walked out of my house, I wasn't thinking about what I had lost. I was thinking about what was still mine. The process moved faster than I expected. Within a few days, everything was set in motion. Legal papers were prepared, notices were drafted, and every detail was handled with precision. Sitting in a small rented room on the edge of Kansas City, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Not excitement, not satisfaction, just a quiet sense that things were unfolding the way they were meant to. The decision I had made years ago was finally coming to the surface, and there was no confusion anymore about where I stood. When the notice was delivered, I wasn't there to see Daniel's reaction. But I didn't need to be. I could imagine it clearly, the same confidence, the same cold certainty he had shown me that Sunday morning. It wouldn't survive what was written in that letter, because this time the situation wasn't built on emotion. It was built on fact, on law, on ownership that had never changed. It didn't take long for my phone to ring. I looked at the screen, and there it was, his name. For a moment, I just stared at it. Not out of hesitation, but because I knew exactly what this call meant. The silence that had followed me out of that house was over. Now he needed answers. I answered. "Dad, what is this?" His voice was different now. There was urgency in it, confusion, something close to panic. "There must be a mistake. This letter, it says the truth," I replied calmly. There was a pause on the other end, longer this time. I could almost hear his thoughts racing, trying to make sense of something he hadn't expected. You don't own the house anymore," he said, but his voice lacked the certainty it once had. "I mean, I've been living here, taking care of everything. I never transferred anything," I said, cutting through the confusion without raising my voice. "Not the house, not the accounts, nothing." Silence. Heavy, undeniable silence. It was the kind of silence that comes when reality settles in, when there's nothing left to argue against. For the first time in this entire situation, the control he thought he had was slipping away, and he could feel it. "Why didn't you tell me?" he finally asked, his tone softer now, uncertain. I took a breath, not out of anger, but out of clarity, because I didn't think I needed to. That answer stayed between us, simple but complete. There was no accusation in it, no raised emotion. Just the truth. He tried to speak again, but the words didn't come easily this time. The confidence was gone, replaced by something else, something unfamiliar to him. Doubt, realization, maybe even regret. But I didn't press him. I didn't remind him of what he had said to me that morning. I didn't repeat the words that had pushed me out of my own home. There was no need. He already knew. I'll fix this," he said quickly, as if trying to regain control. "We can talk. We can work something out." "This isn't about fixing anything," I replied, my voice steady. "This is about what is." Another pause followed, shorter this time, but just as heavy. For years, I had believed that the bond between us would always guide his actions. That respect and understanding would come naturally because of everything we had shared. But now, standing on the other side of this conversation, it was clear that something else was finally guiding him, the reality he could no longer ignore. A week passed, and everything was in place. The papers had been delivered, the time had been given, and now there was nothing left to delay what was coming next. As I stood once again in front of my house in Kansas City, it didn't feel the same as the day I had walked away. That day, I had left with silence behind me and uncertainty ahead. Now, I stood there with clarity, knowing exactly who I was and what belonged to me. The house looked just as it always had. The same walls, the same windows, the same quiet presence it had carried for decades. But something had changed, not in the house but in me. I wasn't standing as someone hoping to be accepted back in. I wasn't there to ask, to explain, or to seek understanding. I was there because it was mine. I walked up to the door slowly, my steps steady, my mind calm. There was no rush, no hesitation. I reached out and knocked, the sound echoing faintly through the quiet space. For a brief moment, there was no response. Then I heard movement inside, slow, uncertain steps approaching the door. It opened. Daniel stood there, and for the first time since that Sunday morning, I saw something different in his face. The confidence, the cold certainty that once filled his expression. It was gone. In its place was something else. Something weaker. Something unsure. "You came back," he said quietly. "I never left," I replied. Those words settled between us, carrying more meaning than anything else I could have said. Because the truth was simple. I had been forced out physically, but everything that mattered had always remained in my name, under my control. He stepped back slightly, not out of respect, but out of realization. The space that once felt like his now felt uncertain, as if he no longer knew where he stood. I didn't wait for an invitation. I walked inside. The air felt familiar, yet different at the same time. Every corner of that house still held my memories, my years, my life. But now I walked through it with a different awareness. I wasn't returning to something I had lost. I was stepping into something I had never truly given away. Daniel closed the door behind me, his movements slower, heavier. He didn't say much. He didn't argue. The words, that once came so easily to him were gone now, replaced by a quiet tension that filled the room. "You can't do this," he finally said, his voice low, almost uncertain. I turned to face him, not with anger, not with any desire to hurt him, but with a calm that came from understanding everything clearly. I already did. There was no force in my voice, no need to raise it. The truth didn't require that. It stood on its own, undeniable and complete. I looked at him for a moment, seeing not just the man in front of me, but the child he once was, the years we had shared, the life we had built together. But I didn't let that change what needed to be done. "You have 1 week," I said, my tone steady. The words hung in the air, final and unshaken. This time, there was no misunderstanding, no confusion about what they meant. He didn't argue. He didn't try to stop me, because deep down, he knew there was nothing left to challenge. The control he thought he had was gone, replaced by a reality he could no longer deny. And as I stood there, inside my own home once again, I felt something settle within me, not anger, not satisfaction, but a quiet sense of order returning to where it had always belonged. After everything settled, the house in Kansas City became quiet again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. It wasn't the heavy, empty silence I had felt that night on the bus stop bench. This silence felt steady, almost peaceful, as if everything had finally returned to its rightful place. I walked through each room slowly, not to check anything, but to reconnect with the life I had built over so many years. Nothing had changed physically. The walls were the same. The furniture stood where it always had. The small details remained untouched. But I had changed. The way I saw everything was different now. Each step I took inside that house carried a sense of awareness I didn't have before. I understood the value of what I had, not just in terms of property or ownership, but in terms of the effort, time, and life I had poured into it. I sat down in the same chair by the window, where I used to drink my morning coffee. The light came in just as it always had, soft and calm, but now it felt like more than just another morning. It felt like a reminder, a quiet, steady reminder everything had been through, and everything I had learned. I didn't feel anger toward Daniel. That part of me had already faded. Holding on to anger would only tie me to the pain, and I had no interest in carrying that forward. What I felt instead was clarity, a clear understanding of people, of life, of the way things can change when you least expect it. For years, I believed that love and sacrifice were enough, that if you gave everything to someone, they would naturally value it, respect it, protect it. But life doesn't always follow that logic. Sometimes, people take what you give without understanding what it cost you. Sometimes, they mistake your kindness for something else. Weakness. That was the lesson I couldn't ignore anymore. Kindness is important. It's part of who I am, and it always will be. But kindness without boundaries can be dangerous. It can lead you to give more than you should, to trust more than you need to place everything you've built into hands that may not hold it with the same care. I looked around the room again, letting my eyes rest on the familiar details, and for the first time in a long time, I felt fully in control, not in a harsh or forceful way, but in a calm, steady sense of ownership, not just of the house, but of my decisions, my life, my future. Respect, I realized, isn't something that automatically comes with age. It isn't guaranteed, just because you've lived longer or given more. It comes from how you carry yourself, how you set your boundaries, how you show others what you will and will not accept. And sometimes, the hardest lessons come from the people closest to you, the ones you trust the most, the ones you never expect to hurt you. But even in those moments, there is something to take away, something to learn, something that makes you stronger, clearer, more aware. I leaned back in my chair, taking a slow breath, feeling the calm settle deeper within me, knowing that while I couldn't change what had happened, I could choose what it meant for the rest of my life. And if this story made you feel something, if it gave you a lesson or made you think differently, then don't forget to subscribe to the channel and press the bell icon so you never miss a story like this again.